Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, everybody, and welcome to this week's Art of Procurement podcast, which is powered by SIG. I want to thank you for tuning in wherever you are in the world. And I've been inviting today's guest onto the show for a little while, and he finally cracked. So I'm joined by Doug Paul. Doug is a GM of sourcing at General Electric in their global operations group. He has responsibility for developing, improving, and standardizing shared sourcing processes, operations, and tools across all of General Electric. And I've gotten to know Doug well over the past 12 months or so, after first meeting him at the Teal Book Roundtable series that I facilitated back in early 2017. Doug is really passionate about the role of procurement. You'll hear that in the interview, but also about our need to continually improve, to challenge our assumptions, and also, I think, importantly, take control of our own destiny. The focus of Doug and I's conversation is master data. So it's a topic that I haven't really talked about on the show. I think that's because it's complex. I think it's because maybe I don't have as much understanding in that area. But as Doug explains, it's really critical to our ability to access usable data, to get it from all kinds of different sources, to help inform our sourcing and our category strategies. So in the conversation, we actually build on an article that Doug wrote for a Teal Book white paper. And you can actually check out that white paper, check out Doug's contribution by just going to artofprocurement.com/190 white paper. That's 190 for the episode today, white paper. And so towards the end of the interview, we also try out a new feature. We called it the quickfire round. It's something that Doug actually has been pushing me to do. So Doug he volunteered to be the guinea pig. I'd love to know what you think of it. Should this become a regular feature as you're listening? That's at the end of the show. So let's go to the beginning. Let's go to my first question. And I ask Doug what I often ask procurement leaders and professionals with my first question, and that's whether procurement found Doug or did he find procurement?
Oh, that's my favorite question on these episodes.
Yeah.
Procurement definitely chose me, or more specifically, a lady named Jody Markopoulos chose me, or we chose each other. It's actually a bit of a funny story. I've worked for GE for 22 years, and the first 10 years or so, I didn't do sourcing, but I did do gas turbines. So we'd install gas turbine power plants. I went from there to be a service engineer on gas turbine power plants, and I went from there to be managing the warranty on gas turbine power plants. Right. And, these gas turbines are, they can be $20 million a copy. And so we had an issue at a customer site where there was a gas turbine was heavily damaged because something was ingested. And we actually went to the supplier to talk about it. So my first interaction in sourcing was with the limits of liability clause, and I was talking to a supplier about a $5 million bill over a $500,000 part they had offered us. The meeting didn't go that well. But,
no, I can imagine. Welcome to supplier relationships.
Exactly. But Jody and I got on okay, and 2 or 3 years later, I ultimately went to work for her.
What was it that attracted you or inspired you or even made you think, what, this procurement and sourcing area is worth spending a little bit of time in?
I look at every new job. I kind of have a new job triangle, if you will. And there's functional expertise, there's business knowledge, and there's personal network. And my view is every job you take has to be weighted on one of those three things. Mm-hmm. And as long as you're aware and acknowledging which part of that triangle you're leveraging, the next role can make sense.
Yeah.
So, in my case, Jody had come along and asked me to come join her team. It was actually a quality team and then a sourcing team. And look, I had the business expertise in that area. It was in the power business, which I knew a lot about. I didn't have a lot of functional expertise in the time, but I had the relationship with Jody and everybody else I would interact with in that role, and so I made the move.
it was kind of a safe space, knowing the team around you, or knowing some of the folks around you as you made the move, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And that first job was actually a job in quality because she went to be the quality leader. And then she went back to sourcing, and then I followed her back to sourcing. My first job in sourcing actually is I went to China to be a sourcing leader for our infrastructure businesses, which at the time was a combination of, GE Power, GE Aviation, GE Transportation, oil and gas, and water. And we were trying to grow the China buy, and I actually reported into the sales team there.
Interesting.
So I spent a lot of time with the sales team helping them set expectations with our customers in the government about what we could do in China to fulfill our contracts with them. And then, my other day job was helping those businesses sourcing teams, maximize their export volumes.
Partnering with sales is something that I still see so routinely being an opportunity that we kind of miss in procurement. I think manufacturing environments, it's a little bit more prevalent. And
right.
I've done that in automotive. But in non-manufacturing environments, there's such an opportunity there for us actually, one, to be conditioning like what's possible, but two, to understand what the ultimate customers actually want. And then we can use that to inform our sourcing strategies ultimately.
Yeah, I'd say the sourcing relationship is probably, I've heard you talk about it before on the show. It's probably the most under-leveraged relationship, the manufacturing relationship, the IT relationship, the finance relationship. Those are all a bit more obvious to the procurement team, but the sales one has a lot of opportunity, and we usually leave it on the table. I'll tell you, in China, the sales team loved me. They loved to drag me to the customer meetings. Because they didn't know what to say. They didn't know what the supply base in China could do. They didn't know what made sense to sign up for or commit to, in the future. So that was a lot of fun.
Just for context, could you share a little bit more about your current role and responsibilities?
Sure. I kind of jumped right in the middle there. So I've been working about 30 years. I'll go back and start at the beginning. Mm-hmm. I did 8 years in the U.S. Navy on submarines, on nuclear submarines, and on those nuclear submarines, we commissioned a nuclear power plant for a fast attack machine, and then I went to be an instructor to teach others how to do it. Mm-hmm. I like to say that I trained 19-year-olds how to operate a nuclear reactor, but don't be worried, I was 23 at the time.
You had a lot more experience than they did.
Exactly. I was infinitely more experienced at the time. And then left there and went to work at GE the very same day, actually. And then first 10 years at GE, I kind of talked to in my lead up and how, I made it to procurement. And then since then, I've done a combination of procurement jobs that kind of touch every element of procurement. I've been the sourcing leader for long cycle businesses, our gas turbine business, heavy, big steel. I've been a sourcing leader for a smaller business of ours that was more electronics and flow. It did a lot of instrumentations and measurement systems, measurement and controls, actually in our oil and gas portfolio that we now call Baker Hughes GE. And then I also ran a commodity team for fabrications and forgings. And so at the end of those jobs, I ended up having an opportunity to join what's called GE Global Operations, which is our shared services wing that goes across the entire company. Mm-hmm. And here, I'm kind of a source to pay guy or a procure to pay guy, depending on which acronym you use. I own and identify and develop all the systems that we use company-wide for supplier onboarding and maintenance, for indirect purchasing, and then also I do accounts payable. So those three primary accesses I do for the entire company.
So I want to follow up on that later in our interview. There's a couple of different areas I want to touch on that really talk into your role. One, thank you for sharing it just for listeners to get some context. But before I jump into some of the specifics, I had a couple of other questions a little bit more broad. I think the first one was, we talk a lot, and you talked about your experience kind of across the procurement value chain. we talk a lot on the Art of Procurement about challenging the status quo. I wonder if there's any kind of fundamentals of procurement that you think that we take as written, or that we've always done them this way, so we're always going to do them that way in the future, that perhaps we should actually be challenging and finding new approaches for?
Look, I think we need to be challenging everything.
Yeah.
That may sound a bit pedestrian, or maybe that's the easy answer. As procurement leaders, as managers, as the folks that run these organizations, and I'm talking about the managers here, because the team is busy negotiating deals. The teams are busy identifying suppliers. The teams are going through the contract terms line by line. As leaders, we have to be completely focused on delivering scale to our teams in the processes they use, in the tools they use, and not just so our teams can be more effective and we can be more credible with them, but also so we can do a better job in articulating our contribution to our peer organizations, right? To the finance community, to the manufacturing community, to the engineering community. And so got to be focused on delivering scale, Phil, right?
Yeah.
Got to be focused.
And as you talk about that, it's an interesting point you make, because I often think that we're very good in isolation. So we talk about how we bring value beyond savings and how we can kind of increase the impact that a procurement organization has. And you often see so many small pockets of that because it's one individual who's inspired to go and try and do something. Or maybe it's a team leader who is just doing a really great job inspiring their team to go and look at startups, as an example. And I'm just kind of making something up, but it's an idea of something that happens in a small area, but then we really struggle to then go and scale that so that it's something that is more of a broad organizational capability.
Just take supplier selection.
Yeah.
Right. When the selected supplier is directly negotiated by a sourcing person, we all know how it goes, right? You do the engagements, you fill out the matrix, you lay out the contract, you decide all the terms. But I don't know how it is in every company, but in our company, we have strategic coverage for everything big and everything important. And at some point, if you kind of follow the vertical down through every commodity, at some point, there's not a ton of strategic coverage on the commodity at some buy level, right? At some purchase value. Yeah. And then so that falls to somebody. That falls to a buyer on the direct material side world. And the people who think that the buyers are just buying and not having to negotiate are misinformed. Yeah. And then on the indirect side, it's even more pronounced, right? Because you have people trying to buy everything from a conference table to reserving a conference in a hotel. And just the mechanism that those people, the buyers and maybe someone who has to pick a conference facility, just the mechanism by which those people know what suppliers to use is crucial. To me, that's an example of scale. Somehow or another, the commodity leaders' preferred suppliers have to be made available to these people who fall below the line for active strategic sourcing help. There's got to be a mechanism for them to pick the right suppliers,
right, and
to be able to leverage the agreement. Yeah, to be able to leverage the agreement without even necessarily knowing there is one.
I've seen that from a prospect within our business that we've been talking to recently, that they have a strategic team, and it's not a business with the complexity of GE. But still the problem exists that it's all well and good having a strategic team that's setting strategic priorities, and this is in the indirect space for a manufacturing organization, that folks at the plant level are doing the buying itself. And so without that coordination of what the strategies are, they're going and doing their own thing. And so the strategy kind of falls apart.
Yeah. And they might be the smartest people to do it too. But, at some point, your strategic folks, they can't cover 100% of the commodity. So how do you handle what they can't cover is an important distinction. And it's what I mean when I use the phrase like scale. Somehow that's got to happen for that commodity leader without them having to do it for themselves.
So I want to talk a little bit about data, because I know that, you and I have got to know each other for the past probably 18 months or so. And I know that this is a topic that one, you're passionate about, two, you've spoken about quite a bit. And that's taking master data to the next level. Like, how do we use data within our organizations to really drive a lot more intelligence and strategic decisions? Before I go there, I just love if you could just share what your definition of master data is, so that we're all kind of on the same page.
When I talk master data, I'm talking, obviously the definition is broader. In this context, I talk exclusively supplier master data.
Yeah.
Right. What do we need to know when we're doing business with the same supplier, me and my friends in the other business, so we're doing business with the same suppliers? What do we need to know that the certificate they have is the certificate I need?
Yeah.
What do we need to know? At my company, we have 1,300 purchasing entities, and you have to onboard the supplier in every purchasing entity. And today, you have to do it 1,300 times.
Wow.
And the potential to goof it up is pretty much infinite.
Right. It's kind of guaranteed that it's not going to be a seamless process.
Exactly. So, we actually, I'll give you some numbers. We started taking a look at this internally, and I'll give you an indirect supplier, like any big company is going to use these guys, Tata Consulting Services.
Yeah.
We went into our supplier record files. We had 252 entrances for Tata Consulting Services, or TCS.
Yep.
And there's not 252 of them. But you know what the amazing part actually was is once we looked to drill down into that and reconcile all those entities just to the ones that were unique. And you have to pick something that defines a supplier as unique. Tax ID or a government legal entity ID is usually what works, but the whole world doesn't use the same one, so you can't use any one field to key off of. There was still 57 of them.
Yeah.
Right? So people may or may not be surprised that there was 252. People are usually surprised to know that legitimately there were 57 unique instances of this supplier that exists, because they have to have a legal entry and a legal entity in every country where we use them. And it's not just an indirect thing. Jabil circuits, we would have 100 records for. Precision cast parts, we would have 100 records for. So when I talk about supplier master data, that's what I'm talking about. The supplier record organized in a way that we know we're doing business with the same guy, that when we onboard them, we can subscribe to them and use the existing data instead of onboarding them again.
Yep. Right?
That's kind of where it starts.
What does that impede? So having that as a challenge is one thing. What does that stop you from being able to do?
Well, the most obvious one to a sourcing person is that it inhibits you from aggregating your spend data.
Right.
Any sourcing person on the planet that's ever been in charge of a commodity or a business or anything, as soon as they get the data, which may or may not be easy, they get their spend data, they then spend all afternoon reconciling the supplier names, trying to figure out, which ones are the same and how many do they actually have, right? That's the first step. The industries have popped up around this specific need alone. There's a lot of startups out there that use machine learning, and they use AI algorithms to reconcile these supplier names, and they'll do it for you, but your inputs are never get cleaned up. So they have to do it every quarter, every month, every day. And so that's not sustainable. So if you could get that fixed up front, right, then you can get a cleaner view, and you can get an instant view, and you can get a real-time view of your spend data. And look, I haven't even gotten to a lot of the other components of this, which is, how do you just know who you're doing business with from a KYS compliance? How do you know you're doing the watch list screening? How do you know that you've got them on the right pay terms, that you've got them on the same pay terms? How do you even keep up, the contact information that, you use with that supplier? So, it not having this inhibits all of those things. It makes it at least a manual step where it could have been an automated step that has to be reconciled by a phone call. And most of the times there is no phone call. People just do it over themselves or
And then you do it. So spend analytics is a good example. You do it and you try to reconcile all these supplier records, and you can never replicate the same thing twice. So you do it one way, and you get to a number you're comfortable with, and then you go and speak to a stakeholder, and they say, "Okay, take me through this." It really kind of hits your credibility when the numbers are all over the place.
Well, that's exactly right. So you end up having a cheat sheet that you use. Right, you have and you develop your own little custom spreadsheet on supplier A is actually supplier D. And you have to review it however often you run this data compilation. You have to review it to make sure new ones didn't slip in, and it's just it's just a unglorious, inefficient. The real problem with it, Phil, is it prevents you from ever being real time on your analytics, because you have a cleaning step you have to do, to fix stuff.
So as you look at what you're striving to achieve, as you think about how you better access master data, is that what the 2B state is? It's real time, single supplier records, all accessible in one place. I'd love for you to just share kind of what the future state looks like, and then I want to talk a little bit about how we get there.
I take it a lot farther than that. Let me take a step. Maybe it's a step back. Maybe it's not. Let's talk about the act of mastering. What typically happens today is we all work, procurement people and finance people too, work extremely hard to master the supplier vertically, meaning from loading them in our ERP to the PO creation, to the invoicing, so from top to bottom, we strive to integrate the supplier vertically, and any other hang-off systems that may be used along the way. That's hard enough. But I think how you have to think about this is it's the horizontal supplier master that's really missing, which means how do you make sure that the supplier that you have in this vertically integrated example that I just shared with you is the supplier that you use to subscribe to your next purchasing entity and to your next purchasing entity and to your next purchasing entity, right? And that it starts off, being inside our company, right, for efficiencies, speeds up spend analytics and simplifies compliance processes, and we know who we've certified and all that sort of thing. I mean, that's step one, is developing that horizontal master. And that's what we're trying to do inside our company. But we came at it from not just the sourcing perspective, but also kind of a compliance and controllership perspective too. Wanting to know who we do business with and trying to spend less money doing our spend analytics.
So I want to talk a little bit about how, but just a question that I wanted to jump off that is, as you think about horizontal data master, are there specific tools out there that, can you get to that by using the tool sets that are, the traditional tools that are out there that you're probably using to manage your master data today? Or does it require a different type of tool to get that kind of insight into your master data?
Our opinion is we looked at the landscape for the horizontal master, didn't really feel there was a product out there that would adequately appreciate all of our standards and requirements. We were a little concerned that we would continue to drive and set standards in some of the areas. So ultimately, we took a make-buy look at the horizontal supplier master and decided to build it.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean we're building everything. We integrate with a lot of other systems and platforms along the way, but we made the decision to build the supplier master, inside our company. We're in the process of rolling that out now.
So as you're building that, which I think ties into some of the how to try and go from the challenge that we're having to perhaps that future vision of a horizontal data master, is
right.
Like, what kind of data sources are you actually looking to pull from that then makes up the master data?
Yeah, exactly. It's a great point. And as we go, there's also the element of what does the future hold. So you talk about what data do you pull from. So first, you've got to pull the information from your sourcing team, right? And then obviously you also want to pull the information from your suppliers. But it's not just that, right? You also find yourself needing to validate a tax ID, right? Validate a bank account number. You may find yourself wanting to understanding in kind of an internal designation, like whether a supplier is preferred or not. And it just keeps going on and on. But you've also got to figure out where you're going to draw the line on what you will master.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of nice to haves that you don't necessarily have. They don't have the impact. It's like the 80-20 rule, isn't it?
Exactly. The way we tried to look at it was, what's core?
Yeah.
What are the supplier data attributes that every business in the company would need? We kind of call that the master. That's about 200 fields. And if you've never thought about it before, you'll go 200 fields. Oh my God, how could it be 200 fields? Trust me, it's 200 fields.
Yeah.
And then we look at it. Well, the next group is, what do the individual businesses need that maybe not everybody needs? In aviation, they'll look for a specific quality certificate, an AS 9100 that nobody else really deals with. In healthcare, in our healthcare business, you have to be, if you pay a doctor, which we have to do in our healthcare business, you have to be very clear that it's a doctor in your system, because there are very specific rules about tracking and documentation about how those payments get executed. If you're trying to do, a lot of times in foreign countries, you end up having to pay through a third party. So how do you vet that the third party adds value and things like that? So we've got core master data, fields everybody needs. And then we've got business-specific master data, which individual businesses might need, but not everybody needs. And then you've kind of got a third category, Phil, which is stuff people want, but there's no standard for today, or you can't explicitly quantify everything you're looking for. I'll give you an example, like diversity.
Yeah.
People say, well, we want to know your diverse supplier spend. And that's great. It's a burgeoning industry, knowing the diverse supplier spend. But to what standard?
Yeah.
In what country?
Yep.
Do you want me to use an external rating agency, their view of whether they're diverse or not?
Self-certification.
I've had customer contract.
Or with a part of an association, all kinds of different ways you can slice and dice that data, I guess.
Exactly. I've had the state of California come to me and they say, well, we need to know diverse suppliers, by the state of California standard. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to need to read the state of California. And then I got another one just 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago from the UK. And they said, we don't want to just know your diverse supplier spend. We want to know your second tier diverse supplier spend. And then you're kind of faced with the discussion that we don't really track our second tier spend. I mean, we have very specific criteria for when we do track our second tier spend, but it's a very small proportion of the time, you know?
Where it's mandated in the supplier contract or the customer contract for government work, for example.
We basically will, if they put our logo on it at a sub-supplier, we'll have to qualify the sub-tier. If they outsource a special process that, we make a lot of high-end metallurgical stuff, right? So there's a lot of specific requirements that we want to physically see and verify ourselves. So if they outsource any of that, we'll go verify that at the sub-tier as well. In certain cases, we'll go to a steel mill and certify the pours. But we have very specific criteria for when we do that, and it is not everywhere, by all means.
So when you think about such a diversity of input, like the sources and pieces of information that are pulling into this master, like how do you get it into the master? Is it a manual process to go and find it, bring it in and key it? Or are you able to set up APIs between systems so that all the data pulls are more automatically driven? It's not a team of people going in there and creating it on a record by record basis.
Yeah. Well, look, you're gonna have to manually input it, but you're gonna have to manually input it a lot less times than you did before.
Right.
Right. And so on that core data, you're going to have to manually input it. You want to try and involve and engage the suppliers in inputting it and maintaining it themselves where they are. And then for stuff that's externally available, you can write the APIs to validate and verify. Yeah. And then you need to keep an eye on the future, right, for the future standards and the possibilities that this might, that this will create. I think, Phil, what I think about is there's a lot of discussion about how do you tactically execute that master. But then what I also use to explain to people why it's got to happen is what's going to happen next, right? Once you've got the horizontal supplier master built, think about what it enables, right? It enables a place where the suppliers can finally provide their information at scale to their customers. It creates a place where your experts, right, can maintain their logs of information on these suppliers and the supplier performances. And they might actually be able to hand it down to the next guy that does their job. Right, which
doesn't get lost in the inbox.
It gets lost in the inbox, exactly. And so here, now you've started to create scale, back to scale. Suppliers can maintain their information, experts can maintain, create, hand down their information, and then you start to form networks, right, of these suppliers that function. And you can develop these networks around commodity experts. You can develop these networks around companies or around industries. And so now think about it. Think about your LinkedIn feed, LinkedIn plus Yelp plus Facebook. As you start to develop these communities, then you can start to share information more effectively within these communities, because now it's not a complete pain. You don't have to provide it in 97 places, and you can up the dialogue and make it, more diverse and more sustainable.
What's interesting to me as you're kind of talking through some of those opportunities is when it goes back to kind of that question earlier about challenging the status quo. And one of the things that I always think about, and I hear from others as well, is like the RFP process or the sourcing process, how it's really, I hesitate to use the term broken, but we're under so much pressure to be a lot more agile, to move a lot faster, and not to take 3 months for a sourcing process. The fact that by the time usually somebody is coming to us to execute a sourcing process, they already know who the supplier is going to be because they spent that time themselves, and we're just there to consummate the deal. By being able to access this data within kind of that network of effect that you talked about, it means that you can actually apply it to a much faster sourcing process, just as one of the impacts it can have. So it can completely redefine what it actually means to go and find and select a supplier, because all that information you usually do through an RFP process is actually already accessible to you.
Exactly. Once the mechanism is there, the engineering team will go pick their supplier, and then when they bring the deal to you, which they shouldn't have negotiated, but they did, at least it'll be with the supplier you approved of in the first place, and so it simplifies the process immensely. And I think the network is, the key to that, because it won't just be the engineering team picking a supplier for a prototype. It'll be the engineering team. They'll have access to those communities of experts. Because when you do castings or forgings or electronics, it's not just sourcing people that are in that network, right? It's supplier quality engineers, it's design engineers, right? They get in these networks too. So this way, when your engineering guys start looking for suppliers, they're in touch with the network of experts, and they have a feel for who might be a good choice. And remember before we said the mechanism was to pick up the phone, but you don't know who to call, so you don't. Here at least you know who to call, and you can reach out, and the networks really start to add value and accelerate.
So I really like the kind of idea of the networks and the power of the networks. I see it in more and more places now. I had an interview a couple of weeks ago with Rob Bernstein at Cooper talking about community intelligence. And it's really kind of the same idea of bringing together the power of the insights, the experience of multiple people to help crowdsource decisions. I just wonder if you could speak a little bit more to how you're really leveraging the power of networks within the horizontal data master.
Right. Well, think about how these networks are going to work. Once you've got the experts talking, once in sharing information, once you've got the companies talking, once you've got the industries talking, right? They're going to form together. They're going to come up with standard methods by which to assess these suppliers. We would call it a commodity assessment in our company. They could develop, if it was an industry group, they could develop standards that all the suppliers agree to live to. I don't know if you're familiar with they call themselves the Responsible Business Alliance now. Okay. It grew up out of the electronics industry, right? But basically they said, hey, all you buyers, you're killing me with all these requirements. We understand the requirements too. Why don't you let us self-regulate how we can demonstrate compliance to you? That worked in electronics. Yeah. But I think that can work in all of these groups. As they get together, they'll form their own standards. As those standards get formed, those are items and elements that can then feed back, right, to the horizontal supplier master. Think about commodity designations, right? Today, most companies they either use like a UNSPSC code or an HTC code, or they develop their own. We've developed our own. Once you're in a community, you can type these commodities in free-form text, and then as a expert, you could look at a supplier and you could see 19 commodities, and I go, well, yeah, but I like them for this commodity and that supplier. I like this supplier for this commodity and that commodity, and you can even rate them preferred, right? So now, you start to be able to do things in this network that were not possible before. You make it possible for me to designate who my preferred suppliers are. That could be extracted and anonymized for external ratings, right? And if you think about it, now you've really started to create the supplier record that's robust. It can be socially validated, kind of like LinkedIn socially validates you. It will perform to the community defined and enforced standards. And look, people like to throw around blockchain a lot. Now you've got a supplier record that's actually blockchainable, right? That could serve as the core for how we take this forward. So I apologize. I know it's a long-winded explanation of the horizontal supplier master, but I find that when I talk about the tactics of getting it done, people tend to struggle with just how hard it is. And it is hard, but I think what people have to remember is what it's going to make possible. There are things we do. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, please, Doug.
There are things we do in our personal life on Amazon, on LinkedIn, and Yelp, and Facebook, in our consumer lives that are not possible in our business to business, our buyer supplier world, because the information is too fragmented. It's often considered proprietary by both parties, and people are nervous about being able to share it in an effective way.
So actually my last question was just on that exact point, because it's something that I always kind of go back to when I think of the possibilities of accessing a lot of this information, but that it relies on the network to actually be open to sharing it in the first place. And, as procurement, we've been brought up, or a lot of us have been brought up, to that information is power, that we don't want to share it. And also our organizations are very nervous about and have very strict policies over what information can and cannot be shared, what's proprietary, what's not proprietary. I guess it could be a two-part question. It really depends on how you want to answer it, because I'm interested to know kind of what your perspective is on that, but also how at GE are you kind of attacking or addressing that challenge to bring more openness to sharing data and information?
It's so twofold. On the first part of it, it'll come, right? When the internet first started, you were afraid to put your credit card in.
Right.
And then eventually you decided maybe that's not so bad. And you liked shopping on Amazon. And when Facebook first came out, you said, no, I'm too old for Facebook. I'm not going to put myself on Facebook. But, then ultimately you realized your family was putting pictures of your kids on Facebook to keep in touch with everything. All right, so knock that hurdle down. And then same thing with LinkedIn. You go, why do I need to be on LinkedIn? I'm not looking for a job.
Right.
But then you realize there's some functionality on LinkedIn beyond just, looking for a job or recruiting. You have the opportunity to validate who you are, with your peers or with your contemporaries, and you realize that has value. And so it takes time. The horizontal supplier master, the supplier data record, a blockchain that will eventually form around that supplier data record, it's going to take time. And that's why I don't mind, kind of talking out a horizon or two, because I think people need to think about it for a while. And, if people go, well, what should I do today? I think where people start today, understand how, and this is focused at a procurement team, how do you find suppliers today? How do you make sure your team uses suppliers that are known to you and your preferred suppliers, even if they don't ask you, right? How do you share? How do you share information between your experts, between your businesses, and how do you pass it down? Ask yourself those questions, and then you'll start naturally down the journey that ultimately will lead you to a robust, socially validated, supplier master record.
It will become more natural, and perhaps the benefit will become more apparent, and overwhelm the desire to not share because you don't want to miss out on the benefits of sharing.
Yeah, people will see the value in the views of their contemporaries, and then they'll recognize that the anonymized data is not so scary. It's not a terrible thing, right? If a Honeywell guy can see a GE guy's recommendation, as long as the Honeywell guy doesn't know it's a GE guy's recommendation, it's is it really a major issue? I don't think so.
You're not giving the keys away to the castle, are you? Yeah,
we all know who who each other's suppliers are.
Yeah,
It's not really a secret.
We just go to a conference and ask people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The suppliers will tell you the second you walk in.
Right.
Yeah, I do business with this guy and this guy and that guy and this guy, and they're all just like you, so you should buy from me too.
Yeah, here's all my logos that I've collected.
Oh, shoot.
Well, Doug, when we were going backwards and forwards on doing the preparation for the interview today, one of the things that you came up with, which I was really interested to try, was the idea of some quick fire questions, because there's so many things we could talk about and that we've gone backwards and forwards on, I think, over the last year, 18 months. We couldn't feasibly put, most of them into a 55-minute interview. So we figured, let's just throw out some terms, and I'll throw out some terms, and you can just give me your 30-second or 1 minute perspective on it, and maybe I'll ask a follow-up question, and we'll kind of see how that goes. Let's share some more of your insights.
The pressure's on. We need to set a good precedent.
Yeah,
I want you to use the technique going forward.
Yeah, well, that's why I really like the idea of of doing this going forward. So if it works, then look out for it in another AOP episode coming to you soon. So no pressure.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
All right, so I have a list here. I'm just going to pick at random. Payment terms.
You're going to reach a critical point, a backlash, sooner or later, right?
Mm-hmm.
They keep extending. You're seeing more government regulations about what terms are allowed, how many days are allowed, a little bit of backlash, small companies versus big companies. I think we're about at a critical point. You'll see these rein back in a little.
Okay. And this is my follow-up then, do you see having a separate set of terms for very small companies who need the cash flow versus what maybe larger, more established companies?
Yes. The regulations that are forming in the United States is kind of like guidance. Mm-hmm. In India, there are different criteria for how you pay a micro enterprise. And ask yourself for a second, okay, micro enterprise, how do I document that in my supplier master? Right?
Yeah.
But generally, the rules that are popping up are either all transactions in that country or are there to protect small suppliers. Mm-hmm. So in France, for instance, you can't have anybody on pay terms greater than 60 days, but it only applies if you've got a French buyer and a French supplier.
Yeah.
So for a big company like us, you've got to kind of wade through all of these terms. But make no doubt about it, these rules and regulations are getting tighter and tighter, not looser and looser.
All right. Sustainability.
Great term, great way for all of us to think about the planet going forward. Look, it works in fishing. It works mm-hmm. in logging. It needs a passionate external body to regulate it. I think it'll be interesting in how the definition of sustainability and what companies will be required to do evolve, what companies do on their own versus what will end up being regulated, and how the different countries approach the same issues.
Yeah, and I can't resist putting my 2 cents in here. That it's interesting to me doing the show. We've had shows on sustainability. The ones with sustainability always have lower listens than some of the other shows, which kind of surprised me and kind of doesn't in equal measure. I think based on no other grounding than that it feels like it's got to be regulation driven for people to really pay to do the things that they need to do.
Oh, ultimately, if it's just a mantra to do the right thing, then it's a problem of, okay, who gets to decide what the right thing is?
Yeah.
And how much will you spend to do that? And of course, there'll be infinite opinions. So ultimately, you're going to have a bar set, right? That we agree. Okay, this is how we're going to play, and everyone works to the bar.
So next one is soft skills versus technical skills.
Hey, it's a manager's job to make sure that they've got folks positioned correctly in their organization based on soft skills and technical skills, that everyone's placed in the right spot on the chessboard for them, and they're also placed in such a way that they can grow the soft or technical skills as they see fit. And, if you find people that truly have both of them, make sure you mentor them heavily because you're going to work for them soon.
Yeah. Yeah, you can all lose them. All right, let's do a couple more. So from a sourcing perspective, the term seat at the table.
You know I don't like that.
Me neither. So I'm glad I teed you up for that. And I'm glad that we share that perspective.
My gut, so I'll just give my gut response here. My gut response is stop whining.
Right.
It's really straightforward. Put yourself in the other person's shoes, whether that other person is manufacturing or engineering or finance or the CEO, and deliver value on their terms.
Yeah.
And do it in a way that you also deliver value on your terms. You don't want a seat at the table just for the sake of having a seat at the table. That's a prescription for getting roughed up.
Yep. You won't be there for very long.
Exactly. You won't be there for. Look. In my sourcing jobs, I already told you I reported to a vice president of sales in China. I've reported to sourcing leaders when I was a sourcing leader. I've reported to supply chain leaders when I was a sourcing leader. I've reported to the CEO, solid line and dotted line, when I was a sourcing leader. Stop worrying about all that. You don't want to be at a table where they don't want you there. Figure out what they need out of you to help them run their business better and to deliver value and earn it. That's my short version on seat at the table.
All right, last one. And you kind of alluded to this when you were talking about master data. And it's some parts buzzword and some parts, I think some real life use cases are now forming. And that's your opinion on blockchain.
Blockchain. I think it's a requirement for any consultant presentation to have blockchain in it within the first 90 seconds.
Right.
I think it's overplayed and understood. Look, blockchain and digital currencies, eliminating the intermediary, unbelievably valuable. As it applies to supply chain, and here I'm going to kind of flip to supply chain, not just sourcing, I think we need to start articulating solutions where blockchain is really going to fundamentally change the way business gets done. We need the industry to stop suggesting things are applicable for blockchain when in reality you just need to set up your ERP correctly.
Yep.
Right? There's a lot of functionality in the systems and the tools we have today that go horribly underutilized. So stop talking about blockchain for proper system setup and utilization. Start talking about blockchain on things that are truly going to be revolutionary, like a supplier record.
Yeah.
That's how I look at blockchain.
Where it's a game changer.
Exactly, a game changer. I was looking for a word like that.
No, I'll pull out a consultant word out of the box for you. Well, Doug, I really appreciate you spending time with me today and for your insights. I'd just love to give the opportunity if you want to, if anyone would like to reach out to you, connect, kind of learn a little bit more about what you're doing, what would be the best way of them doing that?
Best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Go search Doug Paul and you'll find me.
Awesome. Well, what I'll do is I'll include a link to your LinkedIn profile in our show notes. Those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/Doug Paul. That's artofprocurement.com/Doug Paul. And Doug, thank you once again for joining me.
Thanks so much, Phil. It's been a great fun.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.